This lounge isn't for kids like you. Economy's down the hall." The words came sharp and cold from senior flight attendant Catherine Wells, slicing through the quiet hum of Horizon Airways' first-class lounge. Caleb Thompson froze, his small hand tightening around the edge of his boarding pass, the logo of the National Robotics Championship shining faintly under the October sun. "Before we go any further, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe no child should ever be judged by their appearance, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because what happened to Caleb will leave you stunned." Caleb was just 13, a bright black teenager whose entire life had been about proving people wrong. Dressed in his gray hoodie and spotless new sneakers, he had every reason to smile today. Just 3 days ago, he'd won first place at a national robotics competition, building a robot that navigated a maze in record time. His father, Nathan Thompson, a self-made billionaire and the owner of Horizon Airways, had booked him a first-class ticket to Los Angeles as a surprise, planning to celebrate Caleb's victory together. But Nathan hadn't told anyone Caleb was his son. Caleb didn't want special treatment. He wanted his work to speak for itself. And yet, inside the polished glass lounge of O'Hare International Airport, privilege and prejudice were about to collide in a way neither of them could have imagined. Catherine Wells, a 42-year-old senior flight attendant with 2 decades at Horizon, carried herself like gatekeeper royalty. Her uniform was perfect, her posture sharper than the creases in her skirt, and her judgments even sharper still. As her gaze landed on Caleb, sitting quietly in the velvet chair with his backpack neatly tucked under the table, her expression hardened. "First class," she muttered to a younger colleague beside her. "Isn't supposed to look like this, like..." The new hire hesitated, glancing at Caleb's boarding pass on the table but staying silent. The power dynamic was obvious. A few seats away, Mia Alvarez, a 29-year-old travel vlogger with 500,000 followers on X, noticed the tension instantly. She adjusted her small camera discreetly, jotting a quick note in her phone. Flight attendants already sizing up a kid. Could be trouble. Across the room, Richard Langston, a smug corporate lawyer in a $5,000 pinstripe suit, overheard Catherine's comment and chuckled loudly enough for Caleb to hear. "Guess they're letting anybody in here these days," he said, swirling his espresso. Caleb heard every word but kept his eyes fixed on the screen of his phone, scrolling through messages from his dad. One stood out. "Proud of you. Kiddo. Can't wait to celebrate." Caleb typed back, "Almost boarding. Dad." He didn't know it yet, but those words would set off a chain of events that would shake an entire airline. When boarding for Flight 542 was announced, Caleb grabbed his backpack, his boarding pass ready, and walked toward the gate with quiet excitement. First-class passengers lined up, the hum of business conversations blending with the faint scent of espresso from the lounge. Catherine was at the gate, scanning tickets with a polished, performative smile, her voice warm for some, clipped for others. When Richard approached, she leaned forward slightly, saying, "Always a pleasure, Mr. Langston," before handing back his ticket with a flourish. But when Caleb stepped up and offered his pass, the warmth evaporated instantly. Catherine barely glanced at it before snapping, "Economy's down the jetway." Caleb blinked, confused. No, this says first class, seat 1B. Her expression tightened. "That must be a mistake," she said flatly, pushing the pass back into his hand. "Move along." Caleb hesitated, his voice calm but firm. "There's no mistake. Ma'am, my ticket says first class." Catherine sighed loudly, as if inconvenienced. "Sir, I don't want to make this difficult, but these seats are reserved for paying passengers." Behind him, passengers began whispering, and Richard leaned closer to smirk at Catherine. "Kids probably trying to sneak in," he said loudly, ensuring others heard him. Caleb swallowed hard, his chest tightening, but he refused to move. "This is my ticket," he said again, holding it out so she could read it. Mia, now a few people back in line, instinctively hit record on her phone. Her camera captured everything: Caleb's composure, Catherine's condescension, and Richard's smug chuckle. Catherine finally snatched the boarding pass and glanced at it properly. The name matched, the seat was correct, and the barcode scanned without issue. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down, lowering her voice just enough to sound authoritative. "I'm going to need you to step aside while I confirm this," she said coldly, motioning him to the side. Caleb stepped back, shoulders tense, aware of the stares burning into him. Mia leaned forward, whispering to the woman beside her. "She's targeting him. Watch this go south fast." Richard stepped through the jetway without another glance, satisfied the problem had been handled. A few minutes later, Catherine returned and handed the pass back. "Fine," she said curtly, "but don't cause any trouble." Caleb walked down the jetway, the tension following him like a shadow. Inside the first-class cabin, soft lighting glowed against leather seats and polished wood. Caleb stowed his backpack, sat in 1B, and exhaled quietly, thinking the ordeal was over. He didn't know it was only beginning. Catherine appeared moments later, standing in front of his seat, arms folded, her voice carrying through the cabin loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy," she said firmly. Caleb looked up, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But this is my seat." A ripple of murmurs moved through the cabin. Mia, now seated in 3A, angled her phone discreetly, capturing the growing confrontation. Catherine shook her head, her tone sharp. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Economy is where you belong." And that was the moment Caleb realized this wasn't about a ticket. It was about something deeper, something heavier. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I belong right here, sir. I'm not going to repeat myself. You need to move to economy, now." Catherine Wells's voice cut sharply through the soft hum of Horizon Airways Flight 542's first-class cabin, drawing every pair of eyes to row 1. Caleb Thompson sat frozen in seat 1B, his small hands gripping the armrests, the boarding pass still clutched between his fingers as proof he belonged exactly where he was. Around him, whispers rippled through the air, low and tense, passengers craning their necks to watch. Richard Langston, comfortably settled into 1A just one seat over, chuckled under his breath, leaning toward the man beside him as if Caleb couldn't hear. "I told you, kids like this don't end up here by accident." The words hit like a slap, but Caleb kept his eyes forward, refusing to let Richard see him flinch. Catherine shifted her stance, heels clicking against the cabin floor, projecting authority she didn't truly have. "Sir," she said again, louder this time, ensuring the entire cabin could hear. "These seats are reserved for paying first-class passengers. I don't know how you got this ticket, but you need to move to the back." Caleb's voice came steady, quiet but firm, his father's words echoing in his mind. "Dignity is power. I am a paying passenger," he said, holding up his pass again for everyone to see. "This is my seat." A few passengers glanced at each other, some frowning, others shifting uncomfortably as the tension climbed higher. Across the aisle, a woman whispered to her husband, "Why won't she just check the system?" Behind Caleb, Mia Alvarez angled her phone subtly, capturing every word, her screen broadcasting live to thousands of her 500,000 ex-followers. Her caption read, "Flight attendant confronting 13-year-old black passenger over his legit first-class seat. Watch closely." Within minutes, the video had more than 15,000 views, comments flooding in. "What's wrong with her?" One read, "It's 2024 and we're still doing this?" Another said, the outrage spreading like wildfire. Caleb exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. but his throat tightened as Catherine leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough so only he and Richard could hear. "Listen," she said, her tone icy. "I don't know who bought this for you, but first class isn't for everyone. Be reasonable and move." Richard smirked, nodding as if backing her up. "She's just trying to keep standards," he muttered, loud enough for Mia's microphone to catch. Caleb swallowed hard, fighting the sting of humiliation building in his chest. "Ma'am," he said softly, "please check the system. It'll show this is my seat." Catherine straightened, clearly frustrated, and raised her voice so the entire cabin heard. "Don't make a scene. Young man, I'll call security if I have to." That word, security, hung heavy in the air, sharp and threatening. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mia whispered under her breath as she kept recording. "Oh, she's really doing this." From the back of the cabin, a couple craned their necks to see, murmuring, "That boy looks terrified." Caleb's heart pounded, but his face remained composed, a quiet strength that caught the attention of an elderly couple sitting a few rows behind him. The woman reached over to her husband and whispered, "He's handling this better than most adults would." But Catherine wasn't backing down. She turned to the intercom, gesturing toward the jetway, and moments later, two uniformed security officers stepped onto the plane, their expressions uneasy as they approached row 1. "What's the problem here?" one officer asked cautiously. Catherine pointed toward Caleb without hesitation. "This young man's in the wrong seat. He's refusing to move to economy." Caleb immediately held out his boarding pass, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "This is my seat. It says 1B. The officer took the pass, scanning it quickly with his tablet, frowning as the screen confirmed Caleb's claim. "It shows he's booked here," the officer said softly, handing the pass back. But Catherine wasn't finished. "He must have gotten it by mistake," she said flatly. Doubling down even as evidence piled against her, Mia's camera zoomed in, catching every word, her live audience exploding with outrage. The video now had 8,000 live viewers, and hashtags like FlyFair and Let Caleb Sit began trending in real time. The officer sighed, clearly uncomfortable, but deferred to Catherine's seniority. "Sir, why don't you just move to economy for now?" he said gently. "We'll sort it out later." Caleb's lips pressed into a thin line, his knuckles tightening around the boarding pass. But he said nothing, his silence louder than any protest. Slowly, he rose from his seat, lifted his backpack, and walked down the aisle toward economy, each step heavy under the weight of dozens of watching eyes. Mia's camera followed him, her voice breaking slightly as she narrated quietly. "He's being forced out of first class even though his ticket is valid. This isn't okay." The comments on her live stream were relentless now. "Name the airline. Tag Horizon Airways. Fire that attendant." Caleb reached his new seat near the back, slid into the window row, and pulled his hoodie over his head. Turning toward the glass to hide the burn in his eyes, he pulled out his phone and texted his father with trembling fingers. "Dad, they said my ticket's wrong. They moved me to economy." Nathan's reply came less than a minute later. "Stay calm. Son, I'm handling it. Back in first class." Catherine returned to Richard's row, lowering her voice to a smug whisper. "Handled," she said, adjusting her scarf. Richard chuckled, sipping his champagne. "Sometimes standards have to be enforced," he said, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing online. Mia posted another clip showing Catherine's quiet celebration, her caption sharp and direct. "She's proud of humiliating a kid. Horizon Airways. Explain this." Within minutes, her live stream passed 12,000 views, climbing fast. Passengers throughout the cabin were now murmuring openly, some shaking their heads, others pulling out their phones to see Mia's feed for themselves. A man in business class whispered to his seatmate, This is going viral, right now. Catherine, oblivious to the scale of the unfolding disaster, continued her duties with a veneer of composure, but her eyes flicked nervously toward Mia every few seconds. Meanwhile, in his cramped economy seat, Caleb stared down at his robotics trophy nestled carefully in his bag, the gold gleam catching the dim cabin light. He traced the engraved words with his fingertip. National Robotics Champion, 2024, trying to remind himself who he was, trying to hold on to the pride he'd felt just an hour ago. But the sting of Catherine's words and Richard's laughter echoed louder than the soft engine hum, their weight pressing heavy on his chest. He blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall, whispering under his breath the words his father had always taught him. Hold your head high. Caleb, always. Behind him. Mia whispered to a nearby passenger. This isn't over. Trust me. She refreshed her feed, watching as the viewer count surged past 2,000 in less than 15 minutes. Horizon Airways' corporate account was being tagged thousands of times, and Caleb's story had already crossed into trending topics nationwide. Caleb turned his phone over in his hands, staring at Nathan's last text, the promise woven in his father's words, steadying his breath. I'm handling it. Somewhere. 30,000 feet below. Nathan Thompson was already making calls, and by the time Flight 542 landed, the storm Catherine Wells had created would change her life forever. The soft chime from the cockpit phone broke the tense quiet of Horizon Airways Flight 542, and Captain Elena Rivera glanced at the caller ID, her breath hitching slightly when she saw the name, Nathan Thompson. She picked up immediately, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. Captain Rivera speaking. The reply came low, controlled, but sharp enough to slice through steel. This is Nathan Thompson. My son, Caleb Thompson, is on your flight. He was removed from his first-class seat by one of your attendants. I want this resolved right now. Elena straightened instinctively, her voice respectful. Yes, sir. I'll handle it. She glanced back through the cockpit door, catching sight of Catherine Wells moving briskly up the aisle, her posture rigid, her jaw set tight, unaware of the storm she had just walked into. Elena stepped into the galley, motioning for Catherine to join her privately. The veteran flight attendant approached, confident and dismissive, assuming she was about to be praised for keeping standards. Instead, Elena's expression was cold, her voice clipped. Catherine, do you realize who you just moved out of first class? Catherine blinked, confused, her arms crossed defensively. A kid trying to sneak in. I handled it. Elena leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Catherine could hear. That kid is Caleb Thompson, Nathan Thompson's son, as in the owner of Horizon Airways. Catherine froze, her breath catching mid-inhale, color draining from her face as Elena continued, each word deliberate. You humiliated the son of the man who owns this airline. On camera. In front of 200 passengers. For a moment. Catherine said nothing, her mind scrambling, the weight of her mistake crashing down all at once. I didn't know, she whispered hoarsely, her throat dry, her polished composure cracking around the edges. Elena didn't soften. You didn't bother to check. You assumed, and now this entire flight is under a microscope. Catherine glanced past Elena toward the cabin, suddenly noticing passengers holding up their phones, whispering to one another, eyes darting toward her as though waiting for the next blow to land. Panic rose in her chest like a tide, but Elena wasn't finished. Nathan Thompson is meeting this flight personally when we land in LAX, she said firmly. If I were you, I'd prepare for a conversation you're not ready to have. Catherine stepped back, her hands trembling slightly, her perfectly rehearsed confidence unraveling faster than she could mask it. Meanwhile, Caleb sat in the cramped economy row, earbuds in but music muted, listening instead to the rhythm of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He stared at his phone, Nathan's last message replaying in his mind like a lifeline. "I'm handling it." Mia Alvarez, seated just a few rows ahead, refreshed her live stream again, eyes widening as the numbers climbed past 35,000 viewers. Her chat exploded with outrage, users demanding accountability, tagging Horizon Airways nonstop. Comments scrolled by faster than she could read. "Unbelievable. Name the flight number. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." Mia leaned toward the older woman next to her, whispering, "This is blowing up fast. By the time we land, this'll be everywhere, back in first class." Richard Langston was blissfully unaware of how quickly the ground beneath him was shifting. He reclined in his seat, sipping champagne, smug as ever. Finally, a little order up here. He muttered to no one in particular, unaware that the live stream had already made him infamous too. Mia's last clip had captured his smirk perfectly, and thousands online were already dragging him for supporting Catherine's bias. Catherine returned to the first-class cabin moments later, her steps slower, her head slightly lowered, the weight of Elena's words pressing down on her shoulders. She tried to compose herself, forcing a polite smile as she approached Caleb in economy, hoping to undo some of the damage before the plane landed. "Can I get you something, young man?" she asked softly, her tone suddenly saccharine, almost pleading. Caleb didn't even look up from his phone. "No. Thank you," he said flatly, his voice steady, not cruel but distant, a quiet rejection that hit harder than any public confrontation. Catherine swallowed, glancing around awkwardly, aware of the passengers watching her every move. Whispers grew louder, fragments of conversations drifting through the cabin. She's trying to backpedal now. She knows she messed up. This is all over social media. Mia angled her phone again, whispering into the mic for her audience. "Yep, she's rattled. You can feel it. Justice is coming." By the hour mark, Mia's live stream crossed 600,000 viewers, the hashtag FlyFair now trending globally, climbing into the top 5 topics across the U.S. The clip of Caleb quietly clutching his robotics trophy as Catherine stood over him had been reposted more than 1.2 million times, a haunting image that resonated far beyond the walls of Flight 542 in Horizon Airways corporate offices in Los Angeles. Nathan's executive team was already in crisis mode, calls flooding in from journalists, influencers, and advocacy groups demanding a statement. Nathan, meanwhile, wasn't sitting in his office. He was already on his way to LAX, riding in the back of a black SUV, phone in hand, issuing quiet commands to his assistant Brian. "I want the full passenger manifest, Mia Alvarez's live stream link, and every clip that's out there. When that plane lands, we're handling this personally. Back on board." Caleb pulled his hoodie tighter. Glancing at the comments Mia showed him discreetly on her phone, hundreds of strangers were defending him, standing up for him, his name now echoing across millions of screens. He whispered softly, almost to himself. "Dad's really coming?" Mia smiled gently, nodding. "Oh, he's coming. And trust me, they're not ready." Catherine slipped back into the galley, hiding from the stairs, pulling out her phone to check X herself. Her stomach dropped as she saw her own face plastered across trending posts, captions ripping her apart. "Flight attendant humiliates 13-year-old black prodigy. Horizon Airways. Do better." Her throat tightened, heat rising in her cheeks as she saw Richard's name trending too, his mocking comment now immortalized in a dozen viral videos. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she put the phone down, her thoughts racing. In all her years working flights, she'd never been the story. And now, she was the villain in a narrative spiraling out of control. She closed her eyes, willing herself to breathe. But the walls of the galley felt smaller than ever. Passengers continued murmuring, some shaking their heads, others already speculating about lawsuits and public apologies. Mia whispered to a nearby passenger. By the time we hit the ground, this'll be on every news channel. And she was right. In less than an hour, clips from the flight hit 1.5 million views. Major outlets like CNN, NBC, and Reuters already reaching out to Mia for comment mid-air. Captain Elena received another call from the cockpit phone. Nathan's voice steady and measured but colder than before. "I'll be waiting when you land," he said simply. "I expect Catherine Wells to be present." Elena nodded, her stomach tight, replying quietly, "Understood. Sir." She hung up and exhaled slowly, bracing herself for the landing. Back in economy, Caleb stared at the clouds outside his window, silent but composed, his dignity unshaken despite the humiliation he'd endured. Every few minutes, his phone buzzed with notifications, strangers, journalists, and friends all reaching out, but he ignored them, focusing instead on the steady thought anchoring him. Dad's coming. Catherine, meanwhile, sat alone in the jump seat at the rear of the plane, replaying her choices over and over, wishing she could rewind a single moment, the one where she'd judged Caleb by what she thought she saw, rather than who he was. But time was up. The wheels of Flight 542 were already beginning their slow descent toward Los Angeles International Airport, where cameras, reporters, and Nathan Thompson himself waited to greet her, and nothing about her life would ever be the same again. The wheels of Horizon Airways, Flight 542 touched down at LAX with a heavy thud, the engines roaring before easing into silence. But inside the cabin, the tension was louder than ever. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, whispering, phones ready, eyes darting between Caleb Thompson sitting quietly by the window and Catherine Wells frozen near the galley, her polished uniform now clinging under the weight of sweat. Outside, through the small oval windows, a sleek black SUV had pulled up beside the jet bridge, from the driver's side. Two security agents stepped out, and then came Nathan Thompson, the billionaire owner of Horizon Airways, his presence commanding before he'd even set foot on the plane. His tailored charcoal suit caught the late afternoon sunlight as he walked calmly but with unmistakable purpose, his phone in one hand, his other resting firmly in his pocket, every inch the man who built an empire from nothing. Mia Alvarez whispered into her phone as her live stream surged past 900,000 live viewers. "It's happening. Nathan Thompson's here. He's boarding right now." Her audience exploded with comments. "Fire her. Protect Caleb. This is history in the making." Captain Elena Rivera stood just outside the cockpit door, waiting to greet Nathan, her shoulders squared, her voice steady when she said, "Sir, thank you for coming." Nathan nodded once, barely slowing his pace. "Where is she?" he asked, his tone even. Calm, but carrying a weight that made the entire first-class cabin fall silent. Elena gestured subtly toward the galley, where Catherine stood stiff and pale, her hands clasped so tightly they trembled against the hem of her uniform. Nathan turned his gaze on her, sharp and unyielding, his expression betraying no emotion as he spoke. "Ms. Wells," he said evenly, "would you like to explain why my son was removed from his seat?" The question was soft, but its edge was sharper than any raised voice could ever be. Catherine swallowed hard, her throat dry, her rehearsed composure gone. "Mr. Thompson, I didn't realize—" Nathan raised a hand, cutting her off with quiet authority. "That's the problem," he said, his voice calm but carrying through the cabin. "You didn't realize, you didn't check, you assumed," passengers murmured, the weight of his words heavy in the air. Catherine tried again, her voice faltering. "Sir, I thought—" "You thought wrong." Nathan interrupted, his tone clipped. "And you humiliated a 13-year-old boy in front of 200 passengers." He paused, glancing briefly at Caleb, whose wide eyes reflected a quiet strength Nathan had always admired in his son. Then he turned back to Catherine, lowering his voice but making sure everyone heard. "You didn't just humiliate my son. You humiliated this airline. My airline." The cabin fell into absolute silence, save for the soft hum of the air vents. Mia's phone shook slightly in her hands as she zoomed in. Her live stream hitting 1.1 million live viewers, comments flooding in faster than she could read. Accountability in real time. This is what leadership looks like. Catherine's lips parted as if to reply, but no words came. The reality of the moment crushed her. Her authority, her seniority, her reputation, all disintegrating under Nathan Thompson's steady gaze. Then Nathan shifted his attention, looking around the cabin slowly, meeting the eyes of each passenger before speaking again, his voice measured but resolute. "Every passenger deserves respect," he said firmly. "Every single one. It shouldn't take my last name for that to happen." Several passengers nodded in agreement, a ripple of approval passing quietly through the rows, in first class. Richard Langston sank lower into his leather seat, his once smug expression replaced with something pale and uneasy. He avoided Nathan's gaze entirely, suddenly aware that Mia's live stream had already immortalized his earlier comments. Caleb, still seated in economy, lifted his head as Nathan turned toward him, the sternness in his expression softening instantly. Nathan knelt beside his son, resting a hand gently on his shoulder. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked softly. His voice meant only for Caleb. Caleb nodded once, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm okay, Dad." Nathan smiled faintly, the kind of small, private smile reserved only for a father's pride, before rising to his full height and facing Catherine once more. "Ms. Wells," he said evenly, "effective immediately. You are relieved of duty. Security will escort you off this aircraft." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin, followed by quiet applause from several passengers. Growing louder as others joined in, Mia whispered into her phone, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. "It's official. She's been fired. Right here. Right now." Catherine's knees wavered as she stared at Nathan, her lips trembling. But she didn't protest. There was nothing left to say. Two uniformed Horizon security officers stepped forward quietly, waiting at the edge of the galley, giving Catherine space to collect herself. She nodded slowly, lowering her gaze, shame flooding her features as she gathered her things with trembling hands. Behind Mia, an elderly woman dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, whispering to her husband. That boy didn't deserve this. In the aisle nearby, a young tech worker pulled out his phone, tweeting, "I just watched Nathan Thompson fire a flight attendant mid-plane. #FlyFair is history." Within minutes, Mia's live stream hit 1.6 million live viewers, with clips already spreading across X, TikTok, and YouTube, reshared by influencers and journalists alike. Nathan took a deep breath, regaining his composure before addressing the passengers directly. "On behalf of Horizon Airways," he said clearly, his voice carrying to the back of the cabin, "I want to apologize for what happened here today. We pride ourselves on excellence, and today we failed. That's on me. But I promise you, it will be fixed." His words were met with nods, murmurs of agreement, and another round of soft applause. In economy, Caleb sat straighter, his shoulders lighter, a quiet relief settling over him. Mia turned her phone toward him briefly, her voice warm as she narrated, "There's the young man at the center of it all, calm, composed, stronger than anyone should have to be at 13. Comments flooded in beneath her feed. Proud of you, Caleb. Your dad's a hero. This is how change starts." Catherine stepped into the aisle, flanked by security, her face pale, her gaze fixed downward as she walked past Caleb without a word. Passengers followed her with their eyes, some shaking their heads, others silently judging. But Caleb kept his focus on his dad, who had already crouched down beside him again. Nathan's voice was gentle, almost a whisper now. "You did nothing wrong," he said softly. "Remember that." Caleb nodded, his grip tightening slightly around his robotics trophy tucked safely in his bag. "I know, Dad," he murmured, and Nathan squeezed his shoulder before standing tall once again. As Catherine exited the plane, escorted quietly through the jet bridge, reporters were already gathering at the terminal, cameras ready, questions flying. Mia's live stream ended with one last shot, Nathan, standing beside his son, steady and composed, while passengers applauded softly around them. Outside, the sun dipped low over Los Angeles, but inside Flight 542, the storm had only just begun, because what had started as one humiliating incident was about to ignite a movement none of them could have imagined. The doors of Horizon Airways, Flight 542 opened with a slow hydraulic hiss, but beyond the threshold waited chaos. The instant Catherine Wells stepped into the jet bridge flanked by two security officers, a wall of flashing cameras, boom mics, and reporters closed in like a tidal wave. The story had already detonated across the internet before the wheels touched the ground, and now LAX was buzzing with more media than passengers. Mia Alvarez ended her live stream at 2.4 million live viewers, only to start another instantly, and within seconds, her feed surged past 3 million as comments poured in non-stop. "We're watching history. This is accountability in real time. Protect Caleb." Reporters shouted questions over each other. "Mr. Thompson, is Catherine Wells fired permanently? Will Horizon issue a public apology? Caleb, how are you feeling?" Their voices ricocheting through the jet bridge as Nathan stepped off the plane, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late California sun. Caleb followed closely, his small hand gripping the strap of his backpack, his father's calm presence grounding him as the crowd erupted around them. Nathan paused just outside the gate, one hand raised, commanding silence without speaking. The noise fell instantly, cameras shifting to lock onto him, passengers gathering behind the barricades to listen. Nathan's voice carried clear and steady, trained from years of boardrooms but sharpened now by something deeper. A father's fury barely contained beneath composure. "Every passenger who books with Horizon Airways," he began, "deserves respect, dignity, and fairness, without exception. Today, we failed my son, but this is bigger than Caleb. This is about every person who's ever felt judged by how they look, where they come from, or what someone assumes about them." Gasps, murmurs, and camera shutters filled the air as Nathan's words struck home. Behind him, Mia streamed live, narrating in a hushed tone. "This isn't a press statement. This is a promise." Her viewers exploded with reactions, the hashtag FlyFair climbing to the #1 trending spot globally. With 7.2 million posts in under an hour, clips of Caleb being removed from first class had been shared by celebrities, activists, and news anchors alike, turning one boy's quiet humiliation into a global conversation about systemic bias in air travel. As Nathan spoke, Catherine Wells stood several feet away near the edge of the terminal, her back pressed against a glass wall, her face pale under the relentless glare of camera lights. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, her phone buzzing non-stop in her pocket with messages she couldn't bring herself to read. Her name was everywhere, tagged in millions of angry comments, dissected in countless live streams, her 20-year career collapsing in real time. A reporter thrust a microphone toward her, but she shook her head silently, lips pressed tightly together, unable to find words while Nathan's voice echoed across the gate area. "Accountability starts here," he continued, his tone measured but resolute. Catherine Wells is no longer employed by Horizon Airways. Effective immediately. But firing one person doesn't fix what's broken. I'm ordering a full review of our training, policies, and leadership structures to ensure that respect isn't just a slogan, it's our standard. Applause erupted from a cluster of passengers behind the barricades, some holding their phones high, others nodding along. Caleb glanced up at his father, his expression unreadable, but his grip tightening slightly on the strap of his backpack. Nathan glanced back, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder for a brief moment before continuing. I want to thank the passengers who spoke up, and I want to thank Mia Alvarez, whose courage to document this injustice helped us see it clearly. To everyone watching, we hear you, and we're going to do better. Mia, standing off to the side, lowered her phone for a brief second, tears pricking her eyes as she whispered softly into the camera. You guys heard it? Change is coming. Her live stream passed 4 million live viewers within minutes. Her comment section a flood of support. This man's a leader. Caleb, you're an inspiration. This is why we record. While Nathan handled the press with measured control, Caleb stood slightly apart, watching people he didn't know chant his name, reporters shout his story, and strangers debate his existence online. The robotics trophy tucked in his bag felt heavier than ever, its shine dulled by everything that had unfolded since boarding. A few passengers who'd been seated near him approached quietly, offering warm words and small gestures. A kind smile here, a reassuring pat on the shoulder there. And Caleb nodded politely, his voice soft but steady each time. Thank you. Behind him. Richard Langston exited the plane discreetly, trying to slip past the crowd unnoticed, but Mia's camera caught him in the frame, and her chat exploded instantly. There's the guy who mocked Caleb. Name and shame him. Richard ducked his head, vanishing into the crowd, his earlier arrogance shattered by public exposure. Across the terminal, Catherine finally sank into a chair, her perfectly polished composure shattered, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes as she scrolled through Mia's feed on mute. Every angle of her confrontation with Caleb was there, every word, every expression, frozen forever in clips replayed by millions. For the first time, she saw herself the way the world saw her, and the realization hit hard. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about dignity, perception, and the quiet cruelty of unchecked assumptions. Meanwhile, Horizon Airways' corporate communications team scrambled in real time, drafting statements, scheduling interviews, and coordinating with Nathan's executive assistant to manage the flood of calls from media outlets across the country. Inside the chaos, Mia slipped her phone back into her bag briefly and crouched beside Caleb, her voice low and kind. You okay, champ? Caleb hesitated, then nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't do anything wrong. Mia placed a hand over his, her tone warm. Exactly. And now millions of people know it. Her words drew a faint, tired smile from him, just enough to soften the weight pressing on his chest. Nearby, reporters continued hammering Nathan with questions, but he offered a polite shake of his head, lifting a hand to indicate he'd said all he intended to for now. As security escorted Nathan and Caleb through the terminal, passengers spontaneously applauded, some chanting Caleb, while others raised their phones high to capture the moment. Mia walked alongside them, narrating quietly for her live stream. We're leaving LAX now, but this isn't over. Nathan's promised reforms, and we'll be watching every step as they reached the SUV waiting just outside. Nathan opened the door for Caleb, guiding him in gently before turning back to face the cameras one last time. This isn't just about my son, he said firmly, his voice carrying even over the chaos of the crowd. This is about respect for every single person who walks onto one of our planes, and Horizon Airways will lead by example. He closed the door, slipping into the SUV beside Caleb as security cleared a path. Inside. Silence stretched between them for a moment before Nathan reached over, squeezing his son's hand gently. "Proud of you, kiddo," he said softly. Caleb glanced up, meeting his father's eyes, and whispered back, "Thanks, Dad." The SUV pulled away from the curb, disappearing into Los Angeles traffic as reporters scrambled to chase headlines, and Mia's live stream crossed 5 million views. Back inside the terminal, passengers scattered while Catherine remained seated alone, staring blankly at the floor as her phone buzzed endlessly in her lap. Her world had tilted on its axis in less than 2 hours, and though she didn't yet know it, the fallout had only just begun, outside. As the California sun dipped toward the horizon, #FlyFair dominated every platform, setting the stage for a reckoning that would ripple far beyond Flight 542. Catherine Wells sat on the edge of her hotel bed hours after leaving LAX, the thin glow of the muted television casting shadows across her face. Her phone lay on the nightstand, buzzing endlessly with notifications she didn't dare open, its screen flooded with messages she couldn't bring herself to read. Outside, Los Angeles traffic roared, but inside the silence was deafening. On every channel, her face played over and over, clips of her standing over Caleb Thompson in first class. Arms folded, expression hard. The audio crystal clear, economies down the jetway. That single sentence, stripped of context and compassion, had become the defining image of her 20-year career. Every news station ran it alongside the same headline, Flight 542 incident sparks. Outrage, Horizon Airways faces global backlash. Catherine tried to breathe, tried to calm the storm inside her chest. But each replay of Mia Alvarez's live stream only made the guilt heavier. It wasn't just the loss of her job. It was the weight of realizing millions had witnessed the worst version of herself, broadcast in real time to a world that didn't forgive easily. She scrolled through her feed hesitantly, heart pounding as she read the comments. Fire her. This is why bias training is needed. How can someone treat a child like that? Her name trended alongside #FlyFair, dissected in podcasts, debated on talk shows, and analyzed by strangers who didn't know her but felt like they'd seen her soul in a 30-second clip. Catherine closed her eyes tightly, whispering into the silence. I didn't mean it like that. But even she wasn't sure anymore where intention ended and bias began. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled conference room 30 floors above downtown Los Angeles, Nathan Thompson sat at the head of Horizon Airways' executive boardroom table, his shoulders squared, his tone unyielding. A wall of reporters waited outside, but inside, the stakes were higher than any headline. Around him, the company's top executives debated damage control strategies, their voices tense and clipped. We've had 3.2 million complaints filed in less than 24 hours, HR Director Eric Green reported, flipping through a stack of printed statements. Media outlets are calling this the biggest PR disaster since 2023's cabin discrimination lawsuit, another executive interjected. Stock prices dipped 9% this morning. Nathan, investors want immediate reassurance. Nathan held up a hand, silencing the room. This isn't just about stock prices, he said firmly. This is about who we are as a company. We failed my son, but we've failed thousands of others before him who didn't have a live stream to prove it. That ends now. The room fell quiet, the weight of his words settling heavily over the polished mahogany table. He turned to the director of operations. Effective today, every Horizon employee, from senior pilots to ground staff, completes mandatory implicit bias and passenger dignity training within 60 days. No exceptions. Murmurs rippled across the room, but no one challenged him. Nathan leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. And I want a public statement drafted by noon. Not a corporate apology, a promise. We're going to set the standard for fairness in air travel. At the same time. Mia Alvarez sat in her small Los Angeles apartment, laptop open, live streaming updates to her now 1.2 million new followers gained in just 48 hours. Her video, titled Flight 542, Behind the Lens, crossed 8.4 million views overnight, making her one of the fastest-growing creators on the platform. "Guys," she said softly, speaking directly to the camera, "this isn't just about Caleb anymore. It's about every person who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere they've earned the right to be. Nathan Thompson isn't sweeping this under the rug, and neither are we." Her viewers flooded the chat with support. "We've got your back. Caleb, hold Horizon accountable. Justice matters." Clips from her live stream were now on Good Morning America, CNN, and NBC, turning her into the unintentional face of a movement. She shook her head slowly, still stunned at how quickly one quiet decision, hitting record in that lounge, had changed everything. And Caleb, the boy at the center of it all, sat cross-legged on the floor of his father's home office, his robotics trophy on one side and a mountain of unopened letters on the other. Thousands of people had written to him, strangers, students, teachers, parents, sharing their stories of being judged, dismissed, or silenced. He ran his fingers across one envelope from a 7th-grade coding club in Detroit, smiling faintly at the handwritten message inside. "You inspired us today. We're rooting for you." But beneath the pride, Caleb wrestled with a heaviness too complex for 13 years. He hadn't asked to be the face of anything. He'd only wanted to celebrate his robotics win with his dad. And yet, as Nathan walked past and gently ruffled his hair, Caleb understood something deeper. His story had become bigger than him, and now he had a voice people were listening to. "You doing okay, buddy?" Nathan asked softly. Pausing by his side, Caleb nodded slowly, whispering, "I think so." Nathan crouched down, his tone warm but serious. "You don't have to carry the weight of this alone. That's on me." Caleb hesitated, then glanced up at him. "But maybe it helps other kids, right?" Nathan smiled faintly, pride glimmering in his eyes. "Yeah, kiddo, it already has." Back in her hotel room, Catherine scrolled aimlessly, each notification cutting sharper than the last. Her inbox overflowed with news interview requests, HR documents, and messages from colleagues she'd known for years, some sympathetic, others cold. But what hurt most wasn't the strangers. It was the realization that she had become the person in those clips, at least in that moment, and no apology could erase it. She sat with that truth, her hands trembling slightly as she opened an email from Horizon's HR department titled Post-Termination Exit Counseling. The letter outlined options for attending training programs, including one on implicit bias in customer service. And to her surprise, she clicked the link. The opening module began with the question, "When was the last time you assumed someone didn't belong? And why?" Catherine stared at the screen, frozen, as images of Caleb's face, Mia's camera, and Nathan's voice played over and over in her mind. For the first time in years, she let the facade drop and whispered quietly to herself, "I was wrong." Tears finally fell, silent and unrelenting. As she pressed play, meanwhile, Horizon Airways press conference streamed live from its headquarters, drawing more than 12 million viewers worldwide. Nathan stood at the podium, flanked by executives and crew members, his voice clear, steady, and resolute. "This is about rebuilding trust," he said. "Not just for Caleb, not just for Horizon passengers, but for every traveler who believes dignity should come standard, no matter where they sit." He announced a sweeping $15 million investment into diversity and inclusion programs, community partnerships, and scholarships for underrepresented youth pursuing careers in aviation. Applause erupted from employees and journalists alike as Nathan concluded. We're not just fixing a policy, we're changing a culture. Caleb watched from the front row, his small hands folded neatly in his lap, unaware that his quiet defiance had sparked a movement already reshaping an entire industry. By nightfall, #FlyFair had surpassed 40 million mentions across platforms, picked up by celebrities, civil rights leaders, and aviation unions alike. Talk shows debated its impact, while lawmakers in Washington cited Flight 542 in early discussions about strengthening passenger rights legislation. Catherine, curled beneath the thin hotel blanket, turned off her phone at last and lay in the dark, fully confronting the weight of her choices. And yet, beneath the shame, something unfamiliar stirred, the faintest beginning of change. She whispered into the quiet, as if to no one, "I have to do better. I will do better." But even as she drifted into restless sleep, the storm outside only grew louder. Horizon's reforms were just beginning. The media frenzy had yet to settle, and Caleb's story was no longer just Caleb's. It belonged to millions who'd seen themselves in his fight for dignity, setting the stage for a reckoning that would shape what came next. 3 months after Flight 542, the world still remembered Caleb Thompson's story. But now, it was no longer about humiliation. It was about transformation. Horizon Airways had completed its sweeping reforms, rolling out a company-wide initiative called FlyFair that became a model for the entire airline industry. Over 15,000 employees, from pilots to gate agents, completed intensive passenger dignity and implicit bias training, with compliance reaching 98% in just 8 weeks. Customer satisfaction scores climbed 15%, cancellations dropped by nearly half, and media outlets praised Horizon for setting a new standard for inclusivity in air travel. Nathan Thompson's leadership became the centerpiece of this turnaround, but when asked by reporters, he always gave the same answer. This started because of Caleb, the boy who once sat silently by the window in economy, gripping his robotics trophy while the world debated his worth, had become an unlikely voice for change. Caleb gave his first public talk at the National Robotics Conference in Chicago, where he was invited to open the event before hundreds of young engineers and educators, dressed in a simple navy blazer and sneakers, his voice steady but soft. He told his story not with anger, but with grace. "I didn't want to go viral," he said, pausing briefly as the audience leaned closer. "I just wanted to fly home and celebrate a win with my dad. But sometimes, life gives you a bigger stage than you ask for, and when that happens, what you do with it matters." The crowd rose in a standing ovation, many wiping away tears, his quiet dignity resonating more powerfully than any speech Nathan could have given. Mia Alvarez, now sitting front row, streamed the entire moment live to her 2 million followers, her voice breaking slightly as she whispered into her mic, This is why we recorded." The chat exploded with support. "Proud of you. Caleb. The kid's a hero. FlyFair forever." Mia's career skyrocketed in the months following Flight 542. She became a respected advocate for passenger rights, working with Nathan and civil rights organizations to draft new federal guidelines ensuring fair treatment across the airline industry. Her journey, once about documenting stories, had transformed into shaping them, and she credited Caleb every time. And then there was Catherine Wells. For weeks after the incident, she disappeared from public view, drowning under a tidal wave of criticism, shame, and regret. But instead of hiding forever, she made a decision few expected. Catherine completed Horizon's mandatory 24-hour intensive bias awareness course, on her own time and her own dime. Even after her termination, at first, she attended quietly, sitting at the back of the classroom, absorbing stories from passengers who had experienced discrimination in travel. But something shifted as she listened. Faces, names, and emotions filled the void her assumptions had once left blank. By the end of the program, Catherine requested to speak, standing in front of a room filled with strangers. Her voice shook but didn't falter as she said, "I saw a 13-year-old boy and made a judgment about who he was without ever seeing him at all. I thought I was upholding standards, but all I did was break trust, his and yours. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Her words were recorded by another attendee and quietly uploaded online. And within days, the clip had 3 million views, not out of outrage this time, but empathy. It became a turning point, showing that change wasn't just possible for companies but for individuals too. Months later, Nathan personally invited Catherine back, not as a flight attendant, but as a guest speaker for Horizon's ongoing training program, where she spoke candidly about the dangers of unchecked bias and the cost of forgetting human dignity. Some employees welcomed her, some didn't. But Catherine didn't shy away from discomfort. She'd learned the hard way that growth required facing pain head-on. Meanwhile, Nathan's reforms extended far beyond Horizon's walls, partnering with other major airlines. He launched the Passenger Dignity Alliance, a collaborative effort to set universal policies against discrimination in air travel. Within a year, 7 major U.S. carriers adopted similar protocols, citing Horizon's success as the blueprint. Congressional hearings referenced #FlyFair, and Caleb himself was invited to Washington to share his experience with lawmakers drafting new federal protections. Sitting beside Nathan, Mia, and several civil rights leaders, Caleb spoke softly but firmly before the committee. No one should have to prove they belong in the seat they've already paid for. His words, simple and unembellished, echoed through the chamber. And for once, no one interrupted him. At home, life slowly returned to a gentler rhythm for the Thompsons. Nathan spent more evenings away from the boardroom and more time with Caleb, often helping him prepare for his next robotics competition. They'd sit together at the kitchen island, circuit boards spread out, soda cans stacked between wires, Nathan watching as Caleb explained concepts far beyond his understanding. "Kid," he said one night, chuckling softly, "you're going to build the future." Caleb grinned shyly, adjusting a tiny sensor on his latest prototype. "Maybe," he whispered, "but only if we make the world better first." Nathan paused, his smile softening, realizing that in the quiet resilience of his son, he saw the lesson he'd been trying to teach an entire industry. 3 months after the incident, Flight 542 had become more than a headline. It was a movement. Horizon's policies reshaped industry standards. Mia became a trusted voice for travelers. Catherine turned regret into redemption. And Caleb, a boy who once whispered through humiliation, stood taller than ever, a quiet symbol of hope and possibility. On a crisp January morning, Nathan and Caleb boarded another Horizon flight together, this time heading to Boston for Caleb's next competition. As they stepped into first class, the crew greeted them warmly, smiles genuine, voices steady, no judgment lingering behind their eyes. Caleb slid into his seat, buckled his belt, and turned to his dad with a small, knowing smile. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind, kiddo?" Caleb gazed out the window at the endless stretch of sky before them and said softly, "Feels different this time." Nathan squeezed his shoulder gently, nodding. "That's because it is." The plane lifted smoothly off the runway, soaring into open skies under a brighter horizon, one built not from policies or promises, but from the simple, powerful truth that dignity belongs to everyone. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share to support more stories like this. Together, we can make a difference.